Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. At least 3 opposition chief ministers have been heckled and booed by the audience at rallies which they attended with the Prime Minister. Is this being done deliberately? Is this a conspiracy, as the Congress party claims? Or is this simply a reflection of their unpopularity? As the issue threatens and damages relations between the government and opposition, we try and understand what's actually happening. My guests are BJP spokesperson Nalin Kohli, Congress spokesperson and MP Abhishek Singhvi, a senior fellow from Shivnadar University and former editor of The Hindu, Siddharth Vardarajan, and the well-known Asian Age columnist, Ashok Malik. Nalin Kohli, 3 opposition chief ministers from states facing elections the next few months have been booed and hooted at meetings where the Prime Minister was present. Ambika Soni, the General Secretary of the Congress party, calls this a conspiracy. How do you respond to her?
Well, I think it's unfortunate in terms of how the Congress spokesperson chose to describe it. To hold the Prime Minister of India, who's the Prime Minister of every Indian, not of a party or a region, to be personally responsible and to believe that there's a conspiracy where his popularity is evident, I think that's unfortunate. Additionally, I'd like to point out that ultimately it's the same voter out there who's already voted in the elections of 2014 in all these states and who will be voting in the elections that come. And I don't know whether, they should be combining politics with the institution of the Prime Minister's office or the Chief Minister's office.
Abhishek Singhvi, the truth is that after 10 years in power in Haryana and after 15 years in power in Maharashtra, your governments are deeply unpopular. In fact, in Mr. Huda's case, the loudest cheer the Prime Minister got was when he promised to eradicate corruption. So though the response from the crowd may have been singularly unfortunate, you can't deny the fact that it reflects the complete collapse in support for the Congress party, and that isn't something you can blame the BJP for.
Ironically, Karan, I think the very principles which Mr. Kohli is rightly articulating are the principles which prove the point against the BJP and Mr. Modi. It is precisely because he is the Prime Minister of the nation that he should not allow any such politics to come in. Let me answer your question by asking 2 simple questions, which I think are the best proof of the pudding. There have been Prime Ministers of BJP who have displaced and replaced Congress Prime Ministers earlier, and vice versa, at the peak of their respective popularities. Why has this never ever happened here, at least not in my living memory, perhaps not even after or before emergency? Question number 2. Why does it not happen to the several other rallies which Mr. Huda addresses or Mr. Prithviraj Chavan addresses? Now clearly it is because Mr. Modi, who is clearly a great orator and a very effective speaker, has a style which is provocative, which is always political, which is partly taunting, and therefore it is not prime ministerial at government functions. He is fully entitled to do what he is doing in a party function or in the election campaign as he did it. But in a government function, imagine you are inaugurating a nuclear facility and you have that kind of a taunt or a provocative comment.
All right.
And I think ultimately the larger principle therefore which arises is that this is very bad, because you will always have Congress governments at the center and non-Congress at the states and vice versa. If this catches on, no self-respecting minister, if you are a chief minister, Karan, I would expect myself and you to do the same thing.
Okay,
because we would be having some
made your point.
To not go and be booed at a crowd like that.
You made your point. Let me bring in Ashok Malik.
And one last second.
No, I'll come back to you. Don't hog the airtime. I'll come back to you.
Never once unequivocally condemned it.
All right.
Once.
Don't hog airtime now, Abhishek. Let other people come in. You made an effective point. Don't hog airtime. Let me quote to you what Anand Sharma has said, and I'm quoting: "The PM is guilty not by default, but by design for encouraging this. In a planned way, BJP and RSS workers insult chief ministers in the states the PM visits." Given that this has happened 3 times, isn't that at least once too many to be just a coincidence?
2 points here. One, all 3 states see fairly unpopular governments which are facing election in the coming weeks. I would imagine if Mr. Modi went to Bhubaneswar and stood next to Naveen Patnaik, or Calcutta and stood next to Mamata Banerjee, or even Bangalore and stood next to Siddaramaiah, where elections are not due, or where, at least in the first 2 states, the chief ministers have demonstrated electoral recently, would not be voted. That would not mean Mr. Modi is not popular in those states, but it would mean that the chief ministers are not particularly unpopular. You are seeing these 3 incidents in a particular context. That apart, have indeed embedded their people into common crowds to make Mr. Modi look good and make the chief ministers look bad.
That is the accusation.
That is the accusation. Then, politics is not a kindergarten or a nursery school.
Hit them back the same way.
Why hasn't the Congress been alive to this?
Well,
Is it good behavior, just good behavior? How come the Congress didn't catch on that this was going to happen?
But what you're suggesting is there's a tit for the tat, and if they want to, they can do it.
If indeed there's a tit in the first place.
Yesterday, Siddharth Varadarajan in Ranchi, the Prime Minister tried to stop the crowd that was heckling Hemant Soren. He did so with gestures of his hand, which were quite clearly visible on television. Yet despite that, Hemant Soren said this was, and I'm quoting, an insult to the federal structure. He added it was like raping the system. Would you agree, or do you think Mr. Soren went just a bit too far?
Well, I think there's an element of hyperbole in the way in which these chief ministers are characterizing these incidents, and also in trying to directly blame either Modi personally or the Prime Minister's sort of some kind of a BJP orchestration of the crowd, because so far we haven't seen proof of that. At the same time, at least as far as the Ranchi incident is concerned, it's clear that the taunting and the hooting was not from the crowd as a whole, right? It came from a section of the audience. So while it's quite plausible that, or quite easy to accept that Huda or Prithviraj or in Jharkhand that the chief minister may be unpopular, but to have only a section of the crowd indulging in this kind of behavior rather than the masses as a whole suggests that there is a political element here.
Okay.
But I think something else which disturbs me more than the possibility of the BJP having orchestrated this is that what does this tell us about the changing texture? Like, let's assume that these are random supporters. What does this tell us about the changing texture of Indian politics and the increasingly contested nature, even at a function like this, where we've never seen these kinds of things manifest themselves at a government function?
You're making a very good point, and I will widen the discussion. I will widen the discussion to take that point on board.
Just last point, Modi.
Carry on.
Yeah, and I think just let me just conclude the point. Modi, as a statesman, would have risen in stature enormously had he gone beyond hand gesticulation to actually say, I'm going to walk out of this program if these so-called supporters of mine don't respect the dignity of the office of the chief minister.
All right, I think
he would have scored a point.
Let me stop you there, Siddharth. Let me stop you there. I will take up the point you make about what this suggests about the changing texture of our politics in a moment's time. But I want to first take up the second point, which is about what Mr. Modi should have done. Nalin Kohli, Ambika Soni says that the Prime Minister should send a directive to his partymen to stop this booing and to stop this heckling. Given that it's leaving constitutional authorities, it doesn't matter that they're opposition figures, they are still constitutional authorities like chief ministers feeling slighted. Isn't it an incumbent duty of the Prime Minister to respond to that?
Well, first and foremost is, I think the Congress is living with a presumption that they still can determine how people need to act. Just because we've seen a governance model where the party could determine how the Prime Minister of India needs to function, that doesn't mean it has to carry on when the mandate has rejected it. That's the first point. Second is, in terms of how the government or Mr. Modi should have reacted, yesterday Mr. Venkaiah Naidu is on record and he said clearly, we missed Mr. Prithviraj Chavan's presence at the Nagpur function. I think, the Prime Minister has consistently spoken before the election, after the election, and as Prime Minister of India, of a commitment of building a Team India. Now, if the Congress party is not willing to recognize the inadequacies that their leadership is facing and would like to throw the responsibility of that on Mr. Modi's doorstep, that's not acceptable. Okay. Two quick examples. In Delhi, during the Delhi election, Ms. Sheila Dikshit was literally crying out to the crowd, please hear Mr. Rahul Gandhi. The crowd didn't wait. And there was another example of Ms. Shelja speaking literally against the Chief Minister, Mr. Huda, and the Congress party leadership didn't deem it fit to take down their own senior leader. I think the point is that the crowds cannot be expected to be coerced into liking, not liking, listening, not listening to anyone. Okay. But the Prime Minister did the gesture there, clearly indicated that he does not approve of it, in a sense requested the crowd to calm down. Okay. But just because Mr. Modi is popular can't be held against him.
Abhishek Singhvi, in comparison and contrast to the criticism Mr. Modi is facing for not having been more outspoken in putting the crowd down and ensuring calm and order, That is the behavior of your chief ministers who've decided to boycott Mr. Modi's functions. Mr. Huda has actually said that he will not participate in any further functions connected with the Prime Minister. Yesterday, Mr. Chavan actually boycotted a function altogether. Is that not disrespect of the Prime Minister of India?
Two answers. It is not. It is born out of experience. There is no a priori per se boycott. It is not a boycott meeting. On the contrary, to show full respect to the Prime Minister, they experience a huge insult and thereafter they say that. In fact, it is precisely on that ground that Mr. Modi should have ensured that there is reciprocal respect. If he is a Prime Minister of a country, a constitutional position, a Chief Minister is equally a constitutional position for the whole state.
Can I interrupt?
So I think the reciprocity is important.
You're talking about how this is not a boycott. You're arguing that in fact the attitude of Mr. Huda and Mr. Chavan is perfectly both understandable and explicable. How then do you account for the fact that your colleague Mr. Ramaiah, the Chief Minister of Karnataka, has said the following, and I'm quoting, "If there is a government function where the state and centre have to participate, I will share the dais with Modi." He's broken ranks with Chavan and Huda.
No. That's the whole point. That makes my point, Karan. I'm glad you quoted it. Therefore, there is no per se policy to boycott. If Mr. Modi has already insulted these three persons,
Mr. Huda actually said so.
That they will boycott now.
Mr. Huda has announced that he will not participate in functions with the Prime Minister. That is a declared policy of boycott.
Because 1 minute. No, Karan, please allow me to speak. Now, this is not fair. I am saying that is wholly consistent with what I am saying. Mr. Huda has experienced an insult and is therefore boycotting it for the future. Mr. Ramaiah has not yet experienced an insult. If he does, I am sure he'll do the same thing. If he doesn't, he should not boycott. It's as simple as that. And neither should Mr. Chandi.
Except that when you use the word boycott to refer to what Mr. Huda is done, you are actually agreeing with me, even though you began by contesting me, but I'll let that pass. Let me put it like this. The issue at the moment is how effective or ineffective, how outspoken or how deliberately gentle was the Prime Minister in handling these crowds who were clearly unruly and they were clearly embarrassing. He gestured with his hands as if to tell them like errant schoolboys to sit down. But this is a Prime Minister who doesn't hesitate to tweet. He tweets on practically any subject under the sun.
He's been remarkably silent in the past 2-3 months.
But this is an occasion for him to actually be outspoken and to say, I don't appreciate it, I don't like it, don't do it, it embarrasses me as much as it offends others.
You know, to go back to what Siddharth said, for the Prime Minister to stand up and say, I don't want my supporters to hoot or mock these chief ministers, would be to make the presumption that all of them are his supporters. And that's not a presumption any politician should be making, especially before an election. I think we'd be criticizing him if he did that as well. Second, once again, I'd like to say this is in the context of 3 states where elections are happening, and so the political atmosphere there may be charged, and therefore crowds may be more restive than they normally are after an election. There's a larger point I'd like to make. I think the Congress is behaving in much the same manner as the BJP after its 2004 defeat. In 2004, the BJP did not settle for the fact that it was in opposition it had lost an election and it was in opposition for the long haul. It needed to regroup and rebuild. It jumped around like a cat on a hot tin roof. It boycotted Parliament, and these boycott calls which the Congress is coming up with are very similar. Rather than regroup and rebuild your party, you are resorting to gimmickry. It didn't help the BJP in 2004, it won't help the Congress now.
Siddharth Vadaraj, you said you'd like to see the Prime Minister be more outspoken, more assertive in putting down those crowds and admonishing them for their behavior. But what about the so-called boycott of chief ministers like Mr. Huda, who's announced that he will not attend any prime ministerial function, or Mr. Chavan, who just simply chose not to go? Is that not disrespect for the highest executive office in the country? Is there not a certain protocol that requires that they be present?
Well, I think it's, apart from the point you make, disrespect to the Prime Minister, I think it's also disrespect to the rest of the audience who's come to an event of this kind and who is clearly not indulging in this kind of lumpen behavior as these sections who are hooting or booing are. Most important of all, it's also bad politics, because running away from a battlefield of this kind, even if they're correct in assuming that the BJP has mobilized 500 RSS chaps to come and shout, to my mind suggests this rigid stance that these chief ministers have taken suggests that they lack the confidence or ability to combat this thing politically. I think cleverer politics would have required you to be there, when these incidents happen or if they recur, to object to it, protest, and eventually it's Mr. Modi who will have to stand up and say, look, this is too much, this is not acceptable. See, I'm not saying that we know for sure that these are Modi supporters, but the fact is that the same sections who are chanting Modi, Modi, Modi are the guys who are running down these chief ministers. So the Prime Minister has a responsibility.
We know for sure,
whether we like him or not, he has an authority.
We know for sure they're not opposition supporters. Opposition supporters wouldn't be shouting Modi, Modi, Modi. It's to be taken for granted that if you chant Modi, Modi, you are a Modi supporter.
Right.
Let me widen the discussion quickly, Nalin Kohli, and put this to you. Mr. Modi is, after all, the first Prime Minister after a gap of 30 years to have an outright majority of his own. Does he not therefore have a moral duty to be more aware of the feelings and sensitivities and perhaps more responsive to the feelings and sensitivities of the opposition? Just good parliamentary etiquette and tactics would make it better for him, because that way he can guarantee they will accommodate him in the Rajya Sabha where he doesn't have a majority.
Well, there are two parts to it, Karan. Honestly, he's the first opposition leader to have a clear majority in 67 years of independence. Otherwise, we've never seen it. So it is a historic mandate. And if you look at the Prime Minister, you can judge the Prime Minister for two things: his actions and his statements. And whether, if there is any kind of a kind of a disconnect between both. As the Prime Minister designate, and as when he addressed the Parliament on the President's motion of thanks, you've seen him clearly, repeatedly speaking about the federal structure, Team India, and this message has been consistent right up to Independence Day, where if 25 crore people will take the step forward, the whole nation moves ahead. Now, that's what the Prime Minister is there for.
I interrupt?
And it's not going to matter what election is there.
Can
Please,
I interrupt?
Tell me.
You refer to the speech the Prime Minister made in response to the President's debate in the Lok Sabha. You refer to the speech he made on Independence Day, when on both occasions he said he wants to rule by consensus, not by majority. You also referred to the concept of Team India, which includes the Chief Ministers. But if he means all of that, then how can he let those same Chief Ministers be humiliated in his presence without being more effective? At least a tweet distancing himself, a tweet admonishing the crowds would have been reassuring. Otherwise, it looks as if his two statements are contradictory, not hypocritical.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I was making the same point of Team India and also speaking of the issue of consensus. So I'm glad you raised it. However, moving a little ahead, I would like to know which political person or personality across the world is really going to stand up and tell his supporters, don't take my name or don't be enthusiastic about me. He's a popular man. Now, secondly, would he be responsible for, say, the political inadequacy of someone else? Recognize the political reality. 9 out of 10 seats in Haryana, the Congress lost. 43 out of 48 in Maharashtra. 12 out of 14 the BJP got in Jharkhand. It's the same voter. Now, are you going to disrespect the voter? The point is that even if the voter was speaking enthusiastically or taking Mr. Modi's name, he was doing what he should have done, and he did. Put his hand out and say, calm down. And Venkaiah Naidu, as the Minister of the State and as collective responsibility, is sending out that message. We missed your presence. The Chief Minister didn't attend.
Let me bring in Abhishek Singhvi. Abhishek Singhvi, let me slightly turn the question on its head and put this to you. Is the Congress Party's real peeve, and I'm using that word deliberately, what you consider BJP partisan or indecorous behavior, or does your peeve arise from the fact that you simply cannot challenge Mr. Modi's popularity, it remains undimmed, and your leaders don't get the attention in any way like the same measure that he does? In other words, is there a huge element of jealousy here?
You know better than anybody else, Karan, that politics is not based on jealousy. Everybody knows very well that he has come back as the Prime Minister of India with a mandate which is unchangeable, which is an accepted fact. Now, therefore, the question is simply this. This is a very specific, narrow issue. Where is the question of jealousy and sour grapes and larger issues? It is in fact disproved by your example of Siddaramaiah and Chandi itself. They have not yet been humiliated. They have said we are prepared to go. So obviously, it's not a blanket approach. And Mr. Modi, unfortunately or otherwise, has mastered the art of an hiatus between what he says and what he does. He has spoken all the right words, both in Central Hall and in Independence. But you see the singles, the Togadiyas, the Gurveer Singhs and the of Bhagwat, he doesn't say a word about them.
I take your point.
take some action.
Let me bring in Ashok Malik at that point, and the point is really this: are we seeing the beginning of a steady deterioration in political relations between the government and Congress? Because this has all the makings of what to me suggests a downward slope.
Well, I hope that doesn't happen, because it did happen in the early years of the UPA, especially UPA 1, and partly because of the way the Congress reacted, partly because of the way the BJP responded in opposition. And I hope that doesn't happen, because with the exception of the insurance bill, I thought relations between the Congress and the government and the BJP, or the opposition to the government, were fairly okay in the past session, and I hope that remains.
Do you share that sanguineness, Siddharth Varadarajan, or are you worried, like me, that this might be the beginning of an irretrievable journey southwards in relations? A quick answer.
No, I think things are going to get far worse, because what we are, you see, people have forgotten the very minor incident which happened 2 weeks ago in Delhi, where there was a kabaddi tournament where LK Advani, who at one time was seen as a challenger, an opponent of Mr. Modi, LK Advani was the chief guest, and there was a section of the audience in Delhi that hooted and booed LK Advani and didn't let him speak. Right. So what we are looking at is a model of politics, to borrow a military term, that is based on full spectrum dominance. And it's not enough to win a majority. You want to close off all spaces for people who are opposed to you, whether in parliament, so you refuse the formal appellation of leader of opposition to them on some technicality.
You need to wind up.
Well, on this, in this kind of a function, in a function of this kind, you want to ridicule and demean, or you remain silent when they're ridiculed and demeaned. So I think this kind of politics is completely unnecessary, and I think Mr. Modi would do a great service to his own image and to this country as a whole if he were to strongly condemn this kind of behavior by people purportedly supporting him, because this does not do anything for the nature and quality of democracy in India and public discourse in India.
I'll leave you with the last word. Yes, I've seen your finger going up, Nalin Kohli. I know you want to, in fact, object to everything Siddharth said, and I will, on your behalf, note that that finger went up, suggested that you disagree. Or maybe, in fact, you're saying that you hope Siddharth is wrong, and you're...
No, I just want to add a sentence.
Very quickly.
Just very quickly. It's not long. Yeah, very short. I just want to say that at the end of the day, whatever Mr. Modi would not do or do, he'll be judged only for his actions. And that's how it has always been. So let's leave the perceptions beyond. I think for Team India, it would do well if the Chief Ministers also don't insult the Prime Minister.
I'll accept a man is judged by his actions, but remember, a man is also judged by his failure to act. Inaction is just as often a criteria for judgment, and that might be the circumstances Mr. Modi faces. But my thanks to all four of my guests for joining me. We've come to the end of this particular episode. See you on Monday, and remember, we'll be back on air at a different time. Remember the new time, Monday onwards, 8 p.m. every evening. But for tonight, goodbye, good night.